My name is Mary Ann Dudley Ellsworth. I was born in Gilmanton, New Hampshire, on the 11th of August, 1834. My father was Oliver Hunt Dudley, and my mother was Mary Ann Robinson. I was their first daughter. The next daughter, Susan, was my dear friend for the rest of my life. My father was a skilled leather worker and later owned and operated a sawmill. We moved to Boston when I was 2. Once when I was young and lost in Boston, a lady took me in. After resting for a while, the lady offered to have her son walk me home. I said, "Thank you, ma'am, but Mother doesn't allow me to go out with boys." In 1842, Mormon missionaries introduced the gospel to our family. Soon thereafter, we joined the church. I was baptized by Orson Hyde and confirmed by Heber C. Kimball. We then moved to Nauvoo in the spring of 1844. We were met at the dock by a group that included the prophet Joseph Smith. He took me by the hand and welcomed me. Our joys were short-lived, however, as persecution raged. Less than 2 months after arriving, the prophet Joseph and his brother Hiram were martyred. I was 10. I saw them lying in state. In 1846, we traveled across Iowa and wintered at winter quarters. We waited there and crossed the plains to the Salt Lake Valley when I was 16 in 1850. My sister and I helped drive the cattle and even drove the oxen when my father was ill. I was the only woman or girl who drove in the company, and my 16th birthday came on the plains near the end of our journey. When we came to a difficult stretch of road, the yelling and gleeing and hawing in every language and the cracking of whips was terrible. Voices of all kinds and tongues and modulations were mixed up in a curious manner. I looked back. I know that the Lord was surely with me. I knew I must have had a guardian angel by my side. We moved to Brigham City in 1851. I had only been in the valley a little over 2 years when Edmund Lovell Ellsworth asked me to become his second wife in plural marriage. We had not had a formal courtship, just met at church and socials, but I had gained a great respect for him. His first wife was Elizabeth Young, the oldest daughter of Brigham Young. I went to her and asked if she approved of me after telling her of her husband's proposal. She said they had talked it over, and she said she very much approved of me and would rather have me in the family than anyone else she knew. I was sealed to Edmund in 1852. Edmund's first wife, Libby as I called her, welcomed me into her home. Libby and I were always staunch companions. We went through many hardships together and clung to each other as to a sinking ship. I always knew Edmund's first wife was his true love. I can't say our marriage was one of love, but we had a great deal of respect for each other. 2 years later, in 1854, Edmund was called on a mission to England. 3 months later, I gave birth to my first child, Mary. Libby and I lived together and helped each other to get by while our husband was away. We were also taken under the wing of Libby's father, the prophet Brigham Young. President Young was kind, loving father and a grandfather. In May 1856, President Young released Edmund from his mission to lead out as captain of the first handcart company. The company arrived September 26, 1856. Very soon, Libby and I were introduced to 2 young women, Mary Ann Bates and Mary Ann Jones, who had been members of the handcart company. These girls had been very close friends in England, and after their conversion to the church, worked and planned to go to Zion together. They welcomed the doctrine of plural marriage, which would make it possible for them to marry the same man. They agreed to a proposal for marriage with a promise from the suitor to take both of them or none. Much later, it was said of them, in their old age, when they would pull the rocking chairs together and hold hands as they rocked and talked. Libby and I together worked harmoniously. After Edmund took his other 2 wives, we would take turns doing the work. For 2 weeks, Libby and I would do the cooking, dishwashing, scrubbing, house cleaning, and also care for the children. And the other 2 would sew, make soap, quilt, visit, or whatever they chose. The next 2 weeks, we would do just the opposite. The responsibility of conducting family life fell mostly upon the 4 mothers, as Edmund held many civic and church positions and was often away. I had 4 more children while we lived in Salt Lake City: Albert, James, Oliver, and Susan. We moved to Weber County. There I had Jeremy, Dudley, and Hannah. 2 sons, James and Dudley, died in infancy. After 14 years, because of threats and sanctions by the U.S. government against all who practiced polygamy, Edmund was obliged to move to avoid prosecution. In 1880, he moved south to Arizona temporarily, and possibly Mexico later. The family members of Mary Ann Bates and Mary Ann Jones went south, while Libby and I and our families remained. Their departure was quite a specter. 8 wagons with teams of horses to each wagon, and loose horses and cattle numbering between 40 or 50, driven by 2 of the boys on horseback. This farewell was very sad for this family. I eventually moved north to the Snake River Valley to be near some of my married children. It was pioneering all over again. And then in the early 1900s, I moved one last time to Rexburg. I was 5'2", thin and wiry, with blue eyes and brown hair that never went gray. People say I was quite particular about cleanliness and appearance. I wore my hair in a bob. My clothes were plain but neat and clean, and my shoes were always shined. My home was usually tidy and clean. I loved to read and learn. I have a firm testimony of the restored gospel of Christ. I was always eager to share my witness. I upheld and sustained the authorities of the church. I was a defender of the faith. I often said, "Be proud of your great family. You have good blood and are as good as anyone if you behave yourselves." After a rewarding life, I passed away peacefully on the 16th day of December, 1916. My last words on earth were, "I'm coming."